I knew it was going to be a bad Sunday the moment I saw the shirt. I was tying off my horse at the rail outside the church when I caught a figure walking up the road from the east end of town, past the livery, moving with the careful stride of a man who has somewhere to be and no confidence he belongs there. Emmett Hale in a white cotton shirt pressed so flat it could have been ironed by God himself, hair combed back from his face, carrying what looked suspiciously like a borrowed hymnal. He had the general bearing of a man walking to his own trial. My father was already inside. I could have gone in after him, found our pew, sat down, and pretended I had never seen a thing. That would have been the wise choice, the Dawson choice. Instead, I stood at the rail like a fence post and watched Emmett Hale walk into the only church in Elkridge, Montana, and every head on that porch turned with me. Mrs. Crane materialized beside me so quickly I nearly jumped out of my boots. "Well," she said, drawing the word out like taffy, "the prodigal son has found the Lord." Or the Lord found him. He looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. Nonsense. A young man at church is a young man with intentions. She gave me a look so pointed it could have hemmed a dress. One wonders what kind. I did not dignify that with an answer. I walked inside and sat down next to my father, who was reading his Bible with the focused intensity of a man pretending the world outside the page did not exist. Thomas Dawson did not look up when I sat down. He did not ask why I had been lingering on the porch. He turned a page and kept his eyes on Ecclesiastes. Reverend Holloway preached on forgiveness that morning, which felt like the kind of coincidence only the Almighty could arrange with a straight face. He was a thin man with a voice larger than his body, the sort of minister who believed volume was next to godliness, and he worked through his sermon with the steady enthusiasm of a man who had never once doubted that everyone in the room needed to hear exactly what he had to say. I tried to listen. I did. But Emmett was sitting 4 rows back on the opposite side of the aisle, and I could feel the congregation's attention splitting like a creek around a stone. Half of them watched Reverend Holloway. The other half watched the Hale boy, measuring him against whatever stories they had built in the weeks since his arrival. I caught Mrs. Crane glancing back twice, and Billy Ketchum did not even pretend, just turned around in his pew and stared until his mother swatted his arm. Emmett sat very still. He did not fidget or look around. He held the hymnal open in front of him and kept his eyes forward, and there was something in the set of his jaw that I recognized, because I had worn it myself. The look of a person determined to endure a thing with dignity, even if dignity was all they had. When we stood to sing, his voice was quiet enough that I could not hear it from where I stood, but he sang. I noticed that, and I wished I had not. The trouble started after the service, the way trouble in Elkridge always starts, with Mrs. Crane and a purpose. The congregation gathered in the yard the way it always did, clusters of neighbors talking about weather and cattle and whatever ailment was making the rounds. My father stood with Mr. Perkin and Doc Hadley near the oak tree, his hat in his hand, nodding at something Doc was saying. I was heading toward them when Mrs. Crane intercepted me with the precision of a woman who had been planning this maneuver since the opening hymn. "Clara, dear, come say hello to Mr. Hale. The young Mr. Hale," she added, as though there were any confusion. She had Emmett by the arm already, which was impressive given that he was a full head taller than she was, and she steered us together with the efficiency of someone docking a barge. "Miss Dawson," Emmett said. He had the look of a man who understood he was being managed and had decided resistance was futile. "Mr. Hale." I kept my voice even and neighborly, the way you do when 30 people are pretending not to listen. "I see you found a shirt." The corner of his mouth twitched. "I found several, actually. This one lost the least number of buttons." "It suits you. Very civilized." I aim for civilized at least once a week. Sundays seemed appropriate. Mrs. Crane watched this exchange with the bright satisfaction of a woman witnessing the first act of a play she intended to narrate for the rest of the season. Mr. Hale was just telling me about his plans for the ranch, which I doubted very much. Weren't you, dear? "I believe I mentioned the barn roof," Emmett said carefully. "Yes, the barn roof. Fascinating. Clara, didn't your father replace his barn roof 2 summers ago? You should compare notes." Mrs. Crane delivered this with the air of someone who had just solved a great problem of engineering, then spotted someone across the yard and excused herself with a pat on Emmett's arm, leaving us standing together in the churchyard like 2 fence posts someone had planted too close. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving. "She is," Emmett said quietly, "a force of nature." "She is the weather," I said. "You do not argue with her, you survive her." He almost smiled at that. Not quite, but almost, and I felt something in my chest do a small, inconvenient thing that I chose to ignore. We were in public. Everyone was watching. Every word I said would be reported, interpreted, and delivered to kitchens across the valley by supper time. "How is your father?" I asked, because it was the only safe question I could think of. The almost smile faded. "He has good days and bad ones. Mostly bad ones lately." I wanted to say something more. I wanted to ask about the laudanum, or the locked room, or the lamp I had seen burning late at his window. But Billy Ketchum was leaning against the church wall 12 feet away, with his ears practically rotating like a mule's, and I could feel the weight of the congregation's attention pressing against my back like a hand. "I hope he has more good ones," I said, and meant it. Emmett looked at me for a moment, and whatever he saw in my face made his expression shift into something I could not quite name. Not surprise. Something quieter than surprise. Something like recognition. "Thank you, Miss Dawson," he said. That was when I saw my father's face. Thomas had turned away from Doc Hadley and was watching us from across the yard. He was not moving. He was not speaking. He stood with his hat in one hand and his Bible in the other, and his expression was nothing I had ever seen him before. It was not anger. I knew my father's anger. His anger was a quiet thing, a tightening of the shoulders, a careful flatness in his voice. This was different. His eyes were wide and his jaw was set in a way that looked less like fury and more like a man watching something he had been dreading for years finally begin to happen. He looked the way a person looks when they hear thunder and know the storm is still miles off, but coming. He looked afraid. I said something polite to Emmett, I do not remember what, and walked toward my father. By the time I reached him, he had put his hat on and his face had returned to its usual steadiness, but I had seen it. You cannot unsee a thing like that. "Ready to go?" he asked, and his voice was perfectly normal. "Ready," I said. We rode home in silence. My father kept his eyes on the road and his hands easy on the reins, and if I had not seen that look in the churchyard, I would have thought nothing was wrong. But I had seen it. It sat in my chest like a stone I could not swallow and could not spit out. That night, I stood on the ridge above our south pasture, the way I sometimes did when the house felt too small for my thoughts. The valley stretched out below me in the thin October moonlight, silver and black, the aspens stripped bare along the creek, and the grass gone pale with frost. I could see the dark shape of our barn, the fence line running south, and beyond it the faint glow of the Hale place, no bigger than a candle flame held at arm's length. My father was not a man who feared things. He had buried my mother without breaking. He had run this ranch through drought and blizzard and a winter so cold the creek froze to the bottom. He did not startle. He did not panic. He endured, the way the mountains endured, by being too stubborn to move. But today he had been afraid. Not of Emmett, I was sure of that. Emmett Hale in a pressed shirt making awkward conversation in a churchyard was not a thing that frightened Thomas Dawson. It was something else, something about what Emmett represented, or what a Dawson and a Hale standing together in public meant, or what it might lead to. I thought about Mrs. Crane's stopping herself mid-sentence weeks ago. Your mother and Henry. I thought about my father's hands shaking when I asked about the past. That is done. That is buried. Whatever the feud was guarding, it was not land, it was not cattle, it was not an old debt or a broken handshake or any of the things neighbors usually fought about. It was something my father could not afford to have uncovered, and he had seen something in that churchyard that told him that digging had already begun. The lamp across the valley burned on, small and steady, and I watched it for longer than I should have, before I turned and walked back down the hill to the house.